Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate there's still people coming into the session, but we are going to get started because we've got a lot to get through today. So for those of you who haven't been on our webcast before, my name is Alyssa. I'm the founder of Heroes, and today we are talking about recruitment, onboarding, retention, and we're talking about the legal essentials for SMEs. And I'm super excited to introduce Kath Patterson, who is my co-speaker today. So this is the first of our guest series. So I'm really, really pleased that Kath has agreed to be the first of these for us, and I wouldn't have had it anyway. Kath and I have known each other a long time, and when it comes to recruitment, there is nobody else that I would rather be speaking with. Kath really, really does know her stuff. So I'll give Kath a quick chance to say hello, introduce herself properly, and then we'll get going.
Hello, good morning to you all. Yes, we've got a really jam-packed session today. I know Alyssa's got some wonderful insights to share, certainly from a legal perspective as well. And yes, lots we're going to be covering around recruitment, onboarding and retention. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some insights with you shortly.
Thanks, Kath. So how have we got to recruitment, onboarding and retention then? Because this is the last session that I've come to at the end of essentially what has been a termination and dismissal masterclass. So we've talked through capability, conduct, SOSR, statutory reasons and redundancy. We've gone through those in detail. But what we really wanted to balance this series out with is when we have gone through the difficult stuff, when we're having to deal with termination and dismissals and making sure that we're getting those right and doing it in a low risk way. What we also really need to make sure that we are doing as a business is making sure that our recruitment and our onboarding, our retention are absolutely red hot, because that's the stuff that's really going to help us grow and going to help us get through the next couple of what are going to be quite difficult years when it comes to employment compliance. So this rounds off this masterclass series, and we will be starting a new masterclass series where we're going to be looking at performance management. So you can sign up for that. Dawn will drop the links in, and you'll also get it on the emails as well. And the question that we always get asked, are the sessions recorded? Yes, they are. So if you have to drop off partway through the session or you're a little bit late, don't worry, this session will be circulated. So let's get started. What are we going to be talking about and why does it matter? So as we know, UK employment law is undergoing the most significant overhaul in a generation. We've had the Employment Rights Act 2025, which has introduced sweeping changes, which hopefully, if you're on this session, you know about some of these changes because we have done the Employment Rights Act Masterclass as well. So it's a huge structural shift. We are seeing a lot of the typical power shifting from employers to employees, and there's a lot more compliance that's being expected. And when it comes to dealing with recruitment, onboarding and retention, the landscape is shifting because the time constraints that we have got are changing. So what's changed and when? So April 26th, we saw day one rights for certain family leaves and SSP coming into force. October 2026, we've got the changes to sexual harassment and harassment prevention duties. And then the big one, January 2027, the unfair dismissal qualifying period is cut from 2 years to 6 months. And anyone that is employed on the 1st of January who has already been employed for 6 months is going to be caught by this. So it's going to be rear facing rather than forward facing. So if we're not acting now, if we're not tightening up on our recruitment, if we're not getting our onboarding in shape, and we're not working out the best way to retain the best people, this is going to catch us out. So what do we need to do then from a legal perspective? Because that's what I'm going to talk about. Kath's going to give you insights much more around her experience where it comes to recruitment. What I'm going to be talking about is legal obligations. So what it is that we need to get right, because if it isn't necessarily a culture thing, the legal stuff is what can end up costing us a huge amount of money. Now, don't underestimate if you get recruitment wrong, that's going to be very expensive, whether you've actually paid for that recruitment, paid to train somebody, spent management time onboarding someone and getting them into your business. That's a huge investment. But the fines around getting your legal compliance wrong go up and up and up every year. And we're also seeing the statutory caps lifted for unfair dismissal as well. So it's also crucial from a compliance perspective that we're getting things right. So first things first, right to work checks. If I had a quid for every time I'd mention right to work checks in these sessions, I'd be a millionaire. We have to do right to work checks. These are compulsory and we have to do it before somebody starts work. So you have a legal duty to do right to work checks for every worker. So not just people that you think don't have the right to work in the UK or people that you think might not be British nationals or have settled status. We have to do it for everybody. If you don't do a right to work check, you don't have a statutory excuse, and you could be in line for a fine of £60,000 per illegal worker. And there are criminal sanctions that can be applied to directors of the business. So this is serious stuff. So what's the process? If you have an employee who has a share code, this is very, very simple. You ask your employee for the share code, you plug it into the .gov website, and that will give you essentially a page that you can print that proves whether somebody does or does not have the right to work in the UK. We've then got digital identity service providers for British and Irish nationals, where an employee can essentially take a picture of their driver's license, their passport, they click through the various options, and their ID is verified electronically. We've got manual document checks as a fallback. Now, these, we do have to make sure we see the original document. The carve-outs that we had during COVID where we can look at stuff over Zoom, we can't do that anymore. So someone comes in with their documentation and you have to check whether or not that document is real or not, and whether it gives that person right to work. I don't know about you, I'm not a passport expert. That would make me feel relatively uncomfortable. Therefore, making use of the other services that are out there to verify documentation is something that I would recommend. You also then have to keep a clear copy and record the date that the check was done. Now, this is why when I built the Hero system, I was absolutely adamant that right to work checks needed to be built into those workflows. So our clients who utilize our Hero system, right to work checks are built in, and we have a relationship with a digital identity service provider so that this is done as part of that workflow, making it absolutely seamless. So when you've done this, it gets you that statutory excuse. So it protects you against civil liability if a check has been completed. It's got to be done correctly before employment begins, and follow-up checks need to be done where someone has a right to work that expires. So if you have someone where that right to work is expiring, you need to be diarising that or making sure that you've got that automated reminder in your system so that the checks can be done again in time. If you have someone whose right to work has expired, that's also going to expose you to liability. And a key mistake that I do see people making, and I've seen this from clients, is where we'll do spot checks and say, right, can you send me the evidence for this individual? And there will be a right to reside. So they have a visa that gives somebody the right to live in the UK, but they don't have the right to work. So right to reside is not the same as right to work. You do need to make sure that you understand that difference. And so we've got a question there, Jenny. Are there any IDSP that offer a free service? I'm not aware of any. However, and this isn't intended to be a sales pitch, it does sound like one. If you use our platform, we throw them in for free. So that is one way of getting them without charge. So we always need to make sure we complete the check before day one, not on day one. And this has to be done before somebody does any work. So you can't have someone coming in and doing like volunteering or trial shifts. You need to make sure this is done before somebody sets foot on your premises. So Equality Act in recruitment, so discrimination claims can arise before a single interview takes place. So it's important that you understand that the things that we normally talk about in relation to employees, this risk is there before somebody even starts work. So you need to understand where that risk is and how to manage it. So we've got the 9 protected characteristics: age, disability, gender, reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy, maternity, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. We need to make sure that we're not inadvertently discriminating against people when we are advertising or during our recruitment process. And this is something that's become a bit of a hot topic on LinkedIn. And I saw there was a discussion. So someone had taken a job advert and they'd taken it to pieces on their LinkedIn, and there were hundreds of comments on it. And the line that people took issue with, and I'd be really interested in our comment section to see what people think about this, is that a driving license and the ability to drive was mandatory. And this set this comment section on fire because people were saying that's potentially discriminatory against people with disabilities because not everybody's got the ability to drive, and it wasn't clear why this role was one that absolutely required the ability to drive, and that essentially it cut huge segments out of the recruitment pool. Now, I'll confess, the ability to drive is not something that I would necessarily have flagged my legal red flags. There's lots of other things that often do. So when we refer to, needing someone who's young with lots of energy, that sort of stuff, we should not be putting into job adverts anymore. But actually reading things with a cold, objective mind and thinking, is there anything in this wording that is inadvertently going to exclude someone who perhaps does have a disability or perhaps has a family, or someone from a particular gender? So it's really important that we are not indirectly discriminating against people with the language that we are using. If somebody comes to an interview and they are asking for reasonable adjustments, the step that I would not be doing is going, well, can you prove your disability to me? That is going to be super, super high risk. If someone asks for reasonable adjustments, that what I would typically advise is accommodate as far as reasonably possible, because we have seen case law around this very point. And the case that I've got in mind, actually, that we'll try and circulate afterwards when we send this all out on email, it went on for years, and it was around reasonable adjustments at the interview stage, and it cost a fortune for the business that had to defend it. Now, remember, reasonable adjustments only have to be reasonable, and they have to be designed to remove the detriment that the person claims to have because of their disability. So we can ask for information around this, we can have discussions, and I would engage in that dialogue in a respectful way. But if you get into this sort of situation and you start to think, I have no idea what I can and what I can't ask, this is something that you really do need to take advice on and get some guidance from a legal advisor to make sure that you do navigate this properly. And then health questions. So pre-offer health questionnaires are unlawful. I actually saw a contract that mandated it this week and did not apply any thought as to why they were asking for health information. There are very limited circumstances that we can circulate pre-offer health information, typically where there is a certain physical requirement to be able to do something. But it can expose you to discrimination claims, even if you're not making an offer. So health questionnaires, if you are doing this routinely and this has sort of set alarm bells off, then don't hesitate to reach out after this session and we can talk you through when the circumstances where it's acceptable to use them and if actually you should be taking them out of your process. So positive action versus discrimination. So positive action, so tie-breaking targeted outreach is lawful. Positive discrimination, so quotas, automatic preferences generally is not. So what I sometimes get asked, and I've got this with a couple of businesses where they've got typically very, very male-centric workforces. So where we're talking about tech or manufacturing or engineering, and they want to go for targeted outreach. So they might be targeting on specific forums or in specific publications to try and make sure that adverts are getting in front of more women. That is acceptable, but positive discrimination where we're trying to fill quotas, it's dangerous ground, and generally we want to be avoiding it. So moving on to due diligence on candidates. So thorough due diligence is essential to protect your organisation, particularly because that 2-year limit is coming down to 6 months. And I would say employees are getting more and more aware of what their rights are and what's unlawful. And we've also seen a huge amount of increase in the awareness around things like neurodiversity. So again, employees are much more awake to their rights, and they're much more likely to be bringing complaints around disability discrimination, failure to make reasonable adjustments, which, as we know, are not going to be affected by that 2-year, 6-month time limit. They can be brought from on or before day one. So if we are cutting corners, that's going to create risk. So what we need to make sure is that we are front loading our processes so that we know who we are bringing into our business. Now, this isn't about avoiding people who are pregnant, neurodiverse, or have other types of disabilities. What we need to ensure is that these are the types of people that we want to work with in terms of skill set, and making sure, and this is why I'm a big fan of blind recruitment, is the more diverse our workforce is, the more creative it's going to be, the more breadth and depth of ideas we are going to get. If we are consistently recruiting the same types of people, the same personalities, the same profile, often you'll see that skill sets stagnate. And it's super, super important if we want to develop, if we want to get that breadth of experience and skills and creativity, that we try and recruit into a super diverse workforce. So blind recruitment, something I'm a big fan of, but also making sure that if we are inheriting a problem from another business, that we're kind of attuned into how we're going to find that out. So I can spot a settlement agreement reference a mile off. Now, a settlement agreement reference doesn't mean that someone has necessarily done anything wrong, but it is an immediate red flag to me that something has happened that has meant that somebody has had to be either paid to leave their employment, or there's been some sort of settled dispute. So references, making sure we obtain at least one professional reference before confirming employment and making offers conditional on it. Employers have no legal duty to provide a reference, so we can't force somebody to provide provide us with references, but if one is provided, it must be accurate. DBS checking, so basic checks, and regulated professions where we're doing enhanced checks, so where we're working with children, vulnerable adults, making sure that we're requesting those at the right level. Social media screening. I'd be interested to know who does social media screening and who doesn't. There's significant risks that arise under this if we are screenshotting, if we are taking information and screening people in this way. Ultimately, even if I advise people not to do it, invariably people do it. The important thing is, though, that we make sure that we are not being discriminatory by anything that we see on there. However, if you spot someone who perhaps has been through 19 tribunals in the last 3 years, that might be a bit of a red flag about an individual that we're probably going to bear in mind. But I would say caution with social media screening, making sure that we're not retaining data that we shouldn't be doing, and also making sure that we're not introducing inadvertent bias into that process. And then qualification references. So making sure that we can verify what people are telling us about their qualifications, about any degrees or courses that they might have done, alongside those right to work checks as well. Now, if we're in the situation where actually we've got employers who are so worried about being sued on the basis of references that they're giving, that we're trying not to look on social media, we might have a look on LinkedIn, we've done the DBS checks and we've done a qualification verification, that doesn't tell us anything about an individual. So this is where interviews and potentially skill checking is going to be super important when it comes to that recruitment process. So we've got to think, how can we design our process so that we're getting to know somebody, so we get to understand what they're going to be like when they're working under pressure, how they're going to work with their colleagues, and what it is that they're going to bring to their team. So it is important that we start to look at our interview processes, and they're not just generic, asking the same questions. We need to understand, why are we asking these questions? What is the information that we are trying to establish? And actually, if we look at our workforce, if things haven't gone especially well before, if we've had lots of people leave, if we've had lots of turnover, what is it that's going wrong? Why are we recruiting the same types of people? And really looking at that interview process to see what we can do to make it better and more effective. So offer stage and contracts, employment contract has got to be provided on or before the first day of employment. So making sure that written statement, compliant written statement of terms, is issued. Make sure that offers are conditional, making sure that we get those references, and make sure that we've got good, strong probationary clauses and restrictive covenants to protect our business. So probationary clauses, one, if they're in there, we have to say what the expectations are, and if we're going to review regularly, and if they allow for extensions. But if we are going to review them, make sure we're actually doing that. So that onboarding process, that probation process, we should have, when someone has started, diarised when those probation reviews are going to be. One probation review in 6 months is not going to be enough. We should be checking in with people. We should be having welfare checks. We should be checking in on how any training is going and how any courses are going. We should be doing one-to-ones with them based on informal kind of performance stuff, but then also building in formal reviews. A formal review shouldn't just be around negative performance. Regular check-ins through that process are essential. If someone gets to the end of their probation and termination is a surprise, we haven't done our jobs. We are the problem at that point. If someone has no idea that they're going to be dismissed at the end of their probation, they should see this coming. So day one rights, things not to forget about from a compliance perspective. Right to paternity leave, which is no longer contingent on 26 weeks. Unpaid parental leave. So when people want to book off up to 4 weeks per year per child, which is unpaid. SSP is now a day one right, so, and we also don't have the waiting days, and also the right to request flexible working, and obviously whistleblowing. Always a day one right. So not forgetting that these kick in from day one. From October, harassment duties are being strengthened. So if this is something that isn't ringing any bells, you need to be having a look at our earlier sessions on this. We will be doing more on this in the lead up to October, but from October we are going to have to take all reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace, and also all reasonable steps to prevent harassment generally, and also around third parties. So we haven't got the time to go through harassment in detail. It's not a harassment session, so look through one of our other sessions if this is something that has kind of skipped you by. You have got a little bit of time, but not much. We need to be ready for this. And then there's also going to be the requirement to inform employees of their rights in relation to trade unions. So we will be putting out more detail about that nearer the time so that your contracts can be up to date. So as we've already talked about, qualifying period is reducing from 2 years to 6 months. So we need to be getting into the habit of running 6-month probation processes now. Don't let this be a surprise from January. The compensation cap for unfair dismissal is also being removed. So no longer are we going to be able to say, well, if we get pinged on unfair dismissal, it's not the end of the world. There's a statutory cap on it. It's not going to break the bank. That cap is being lifted. And the time limit that someone will have to bring a tribunal is extending from 3 months to 6 months. So it's critical that you start to make your good habits now, so that we have mapped out what our probation processes look like, when our check-ins are going to be, that we understand how it is that we are going to be measuring performance, how we're going to be documenting and evidencing it, so that when we get to that final meeting, the employee has been through several meetings, they understand what was expected of them, they know where they stand, and it's not going to be coming as a surprise. So then when it comes to retention from a legal perspective, it's not just about people strategy, it's also about legal risk management. So making sure that you are implementing fair pay and transparency. So even if you're not a business that has to report on equal pay, please just pay people fairly. It's really not very difficult. Men and women should be paid the same for doing the same kinds of work. That shouldn't even be an issue anymore. Family friendly policies, so making sure not only that you've got that day one stuff bang on, but also that your managers understand there are a huge amount of family rights that people are entitled to now at work. Do your managers know the difference between bereavement leave, parental leave, paternity leave, shared parental leave? There's lots of different types of leave. We've got neonatal leave as well, sick leave. Can your managers really understand which one applies and when, if somebody asks for it, and what the rights are, because they should be familiar with this stuff. Understanding what you can and can't do with flexible working requests, that people have the right to request it, not necessarily the right to have it, but also there's a strict process that we have to follow. And making sure that post 2027 performance is managed absolutely in a compliant way. So again, it could well be that you need to be training your managers before 2027. And this is something that we are loading our e-learning platform with, so that you can put managers on courses, that they can be doing this stuff in their when they've got a few minutes at work, and making sure that they're skilled up before 2027. So there's a compliance checklist that we're going to leave on here. We're going to circulate this, as I've said, after the session, of things that you need to do now, things that you need to do before October, stuff that you should already have done by April, and the things that you need to do by January 2027. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Kath, who is going to take you through practical recruitment strategies, and then we've got time for a bit of a Q&A and discussion at the end.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alyssa. All really important points raised there. And thanks to the rest of the lovely team at Heroes as well for inviting me on to today's webcast. And of course, thank you all for joining us. Just get me move my slides along. There we go. I know what I'm doing now. Over the past 25 years, I've had the pleasure of building my own teams while helping employers navigate recruitment and talent retention, solving many challenges along the way. The focus in today's session is on how to attract, hire and retain the right people. Now, many businesses know the benefits of getting it right, but what are the risks and costs of getting it wrong? And what can employers do to prevent that from happening? Well, over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to provide some key insights and practical tips for you to take away. I'd like to share the recruitment and retention challenges experienced by a small but fast-growing manufacturing business that I supported early last year as an independent hiring specialist and HR consultant. I'd also like to share the positive impact that once a new approach was introduced, what that did for the business. The business was recruiting following a resignation, and their immediate reaction was to dust off the same advert used 2 years earlier and quickly post it on their job board. And when I say a job advert, it was a long list of duties. I'll come back to that. Applications flooded in, and over the next 2 weeks, the HR administrator spent many hours reviewing CVs. 8 candidates were then invited to interview with the managing director. The interviews were conducted as informal chats, and once they were completed, an offer was made. The candidate accepted, worked the 1 month's notice and joined the business. So far, so good, perhaps. Well, just 1 month later, the new hire resigned by text message, stating that they didn't feel that they fit in with the team, felt overwhelmed in the role, and had already secured another job elsewhere, so wouldn't be returning. At that point, the business owner contacted me for support because the need to get the right person in the role had become even more critical, with customer service experience being negatively impacted. Having reviewed the process that they'd undertaken, the business had spent more than 30 hours reviewing CVs, arranging and conducting interviews, and managing the offer process, plus 1 month's salary for a low productive hire. And 2.5 months after the original resignation, they were not just back at square one, but in even more of a pickle. Pressure on colleagues had increased, morale had dipped, and productivity had suffered. And for some businesses, situations like this can eventually lead to other employees leaving too. In summary, the rush to recruit led to an ill-informed hiring process which lacked structure and proper onboarding, resulting in an expensive exercise and more business pressure. On screen are just some of the hidden costs that this business face, but there can be many more financial implications of not getting recruitment right. According to a report last year by the Recruitment and Employment Confederation, a bad hire at mid-manager level with a salary of £42,000 can cost a business more than £100,000 due to the accumulation of costs associated with the recruitment process, training, onboarding, wasted salary, and other additional factors. Now, these are some of the common ways that I see recruitment and onboarding going wrong. They include job adverts that are misaligned with the actual role and requirements, a lack of detail for potential applicants to make an informed decision about whether to apply, poor communication and engagement throughout the process, and ill-informed hiring decisions that are made from bias in the process or lack of structure. Every stage in the process plays a critical role in getting recruitment right, and the process doesn't stop once a suitable candidate is identified. Effective handling of the job offer, pre-onboarding and onboarding is vital to ensure a positive candidate experience, high productivity, and ultimately retention. For the employer that I featured today, the first thing we did was to stop and properly assess the role, not just for what the business needed immediately, but for what it would need over the next 6, 12, and 18 months. Interestingly, what the business actually needed looked very different from the role they'd advertised just 2 months earlier. This is one of the most common pitfalls I see. Employers rush to replace a person before properly defining what the business genuinely needs. We then created a proper job advert, not a copy and paste of the job description, but a piece of marketing designed to attract the right candidates and the best candidates. If you want to attract great talent, you need to showcase what makes you a great employer, provide a genuine picture of the opportunity, and transparency with the package and working conditions to help candidates make informed decisions. Doing this also reduces unsuitable applications, saving you valuable time. And it's important to consider which channels will be most appropriate to reach your desired candidates too. And this includes not just limiting to, say, just one job board, for example. With this business, we also introduced a more structured, inclusive and objective recruitment process to improve consistency, fairness and reduce legal risk. That included short telephone screening calls to refine the shortlist for interview, structured values-based interview questions, task-based assessments, and involving the wider team in the process so that employees felt their opinions were valued. After all, feeling valued plays a huge role in retention. Finally, we introduced a proper onboarding plan to make sure that the successful candidate felt welcomed, supported, and set up for success from day one. Now, Alyssa and I will talk more about onboarding shortly, but before we do, I wanted to share the outcome for this employer. I'm delighted to say that the successful candidate is still thriving in the business 1 year on. Team morale and productivity have improved. The business rolled out the same hiring and onboarding approach across future recruitment, and they identified significant savings in both time and direct financial costs. And recruitment no longer feels like a burden. Having considered the wider benefits, the business went on to review the overall employee experience, introducing development and engagement strategies that further reduce staff turnover and increase productivity. Hopefully that case study gives you a practical insight into how even small changes to recruitment and selection processes can make a huge difference to talent attraction, retention, productivity, employee engagement, and ultimately business performance. And that's without getting into how technology, and particularly AI, can help play a helping hand, yet at the same time obviously create challenges. But I'll save that topic for another time. With businesses facing rising economic pressures that are squeezing margins, along with a reduced window in which unfair dismissal claims can be brought against them, there has never been a more important time to review recruitment, onboarding and retention strategies to reduce the risk of costly mistake hires. I'll now hand you back over to Alyssa to lead us on to the onboarding discussion. Over to you, Alyssa.
Thanks, Kath. I mean, I'm never surprised at how detailed and valuable your insights are. So thank you for that. I'm just going to jump down to the questions quickly, so that we can kick off with some Q&A. So Adrian, I've seen you've said, could you have a copy of their passport sent to you before day one, then visually confirm on day one? So we have to have these checks done before day one of employment. So getting the copy on email doesn't really add anything other than it's perhaps flagging that they may have a certain type of document, but before they start on day one, so it's before their employment commences, we have to have that check done, unfortunately. So ultimately, unless you are having an audit or inspection, or you were reported for doing this, it's quite a difficult one, I suspect, for the Home Office to catch, because the reality is if you've got someone stepping onto the premises with their document and you're able to confirm it there and then, it's unlikely to cause you any issues, but it's not a lawful way of doing it. So I would advise that it's done before day one. I know this is difficult, particularly when we've got original documentation and we're having to ask people to come in to do this. My suggestion is usually to ask people to bring documentation to interview, if you're interviewing in person, so that you can do this, and it's ticked off and done well in advance, perhaps even off a stage, if we are going to need original documentation rather than using one of the service providers. Jenny, we've got a question from you. So most companies only confirm employment dates on their references. This might be one for you, Kath, maybe one for both of us. So most companies only confirm employment dates on references, not giving real indication on an individual. Is there a way around this? So what can we do around checking people's employment background? I'll let you jump in first with that one, Kath, if you want.
Well, the first thing I'd say is that it's always still worth getting that reference, even if all you get back is dates, because actually I've seen it happen actually where a reference has been provided and the dates that have been confirmed on there actually differ to what is on the CV or somebody's LinkedIn profile. So that could obviously, raise questions that need to be asked really to the candidate about the discrepancies there. So it's always still worth requesting the reference regardless, even if you know, or even if it comes back with just dates, or if you know that's what that employer does. There are situations as well where I've known employers to contact the employer by phone, and often they'll be given information verbally. The difficulty with that is it's often given off the record. So that can be a little bit tricky really, because it's obviously, if you wanted to use the information, it's unlikely that that's going to be backed up. But often it doesn't necessarily mean it's negative information. They might be giving somebody a very glowing report on what they were like to work with and their performance, but they're just not able to sort of put that in writing because it might be company policy. So, I have known employers to do that as well, where they've picked up the phone rather than just sort of requesting references in writing. But like I said, even if you get dates back only, it's worth getting those, because they can throw things up to raise further questions.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I definitely see that where we get people then say, oh, well, we'll pick up the phone and have a chat, which is why when I draft settlement agreement ones, I usually put a line in to say, and we won't be providing any information by any other means. So again, if you see that on a reference that they say they're not prepared to provide further information outside of that written environment, that's an indicator of a settlement agreement one as well. But I'd also say asking perhaps for references further back. I mean, look, we don't want to go too historical because they start to lose some relevance. But if we've got one recent one and we're only getting dates, perhaps we ask for something that goes a little bit further back into the employment history. But also, I think from my perspective, when we're looking at things like fit, skills and other things people might be bringing to a role, do they hold any voluntary roles? Are they doing anything else outside of work where we can look for additional references from there? So I'm an RNLI volunteer, and it's something that I have utilised in the past when I've needed references. I've had them come from within the RNLI as well. So even though it's not a paid role, they are able to give evidence around some of my skills, aptitudes, and you know, the way I've operated within the RNLI. So I think also try and think outside the box with these sorts of things as well, because particularly when it does come to volunteer duties or things that people do outside of work, I wouldn't underestimate the skills that it can bring to somebody, that they're going to bring into your workforce as well.
The other thing to keep in mind as well is just because somebody didn't particularly thrive in a previous role doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to thrive in your role. It could be a very different type of role, and that might be the reason why they're wanting to leave. So yes, there are certain things that you'd want to see from reference, perhaps that would be quite important in terms of reliability and commitment and what have you. But it may be actually their performance for that particular role, it could be very different to the one that you've got on offer. So I think it's also past doesn't necessarily always reflect future.
And also, I think, you know, when you're interviewing someone who perhaps admits that they've walked away from a role very quickly, so they've only been somewhere 2 or 3 weeks and they've made a judgment, said this isn't for me, that can show an element of strength of character as well. It's not always an indication that someone has been a bad performer. And also gaps in employment. So this is one of my favorite things to talk about, because I don't necessarily see gaps in employment as a bad thing. You know, people can go off, do other things, have families, you know, maybe go traveling, develop other skill sets, go back to university. So what's your take on that, Kath, when it comes to gaps?
Completely agree. And it's just about asking, not making assumptions, like everything to do with the whole selection process. No assumptions. Be like me. Be very nosy. Ask lots of questions. Don't be afraid, because it's amazing actually that, you know, it's very easy. I've been there where, you know, you've looked at a CV and you've pondered on, okay, I've clocked those questions, and you start to sort of make your own sort of assumptions there. But actually, because I'm not afraid to ask the questions of those candidates, and you suddenly find that there's actually very good reasons behind why, you know, there could genuinely have been a redundancy where a site's closed and then they've relocated because the partner's in the forces, and then they've had children, and actually there's a very genuine story there. And that doesn't mean to say they're not going to be committed sort of for the going forward, but again, it's just asking questions, but certainly be open-minded and avoid those assumptions.
So we have another question here. So how do we attract more local talent? Our hiring managers are getting frustrated with candidates lying on application forms stating that candidates do not require sponsorship, and of the day of the interview they state the opposite. That obviously wastes resources and time. So I think there's a couple of questions there. So Kath, do you want to take the how do we attract more local talent, and then I'll touch on the sponsorship stuff?
Absolutely. Now, in terms of local talent, it obviously depends on the geographical location where you are really as to what that talent looks like. But certainly it's about looking at the channels. First of all, I mean, it's what's in the job advert, but what's in the channels in terms of what channels you use, should I say, in terms of attraction. So are dependent on the type of role and level of role. Are you using multiple kind of sources to attract people? Could it be that it's local colleges and universities? Are you using local job sites? Are you interacting with people in local social media channels, for example? Could you hold an open day, which is more likely to attract people from the local area? So there are lots of things that you can do to sort of really target in on that local workforce. But when we say local as well, in terms of from a UK point of view, in terms of locality, obviously more and more employers now are able to offer sort of hybrid working and flexible working, which means that actually you can broaden your talent pool beyond those that live within 10, 15 miles of where your premises are. So actually it's also being careful about not narrowing things too much when we talk about local, that actually we do only focus on what's on our doorstep, because if you can offer a hybrid working situation where somebody only needs to come in the office 3 days a week, there could be candidates that live up to an hour away that actually will be more than happy to come into your premises 3 days a week, but perhaps 5 days a week doing that might be a bit of a stretch as well. So it's getting that balance of kind of localized talent, as in very localized, to making sure that you don't also depend on, I mean, we're based in North Wales, so of course there are geographical challenges here. Certainly if you get into the more rural areas that, you know, you want the people on the doorstep, but you also need to think a little bit further afield than that too. I don't know if you, Alyssa, want to tackle more in terms of kind of on the sponsorship side of things there.
Yeah, so when it comes to sponsorship, obviously, if you're not a sponsor, you're not going to be able to employ people who are coming on under the sponsorship regime. So I would say, in terms of having those clearing questions, that making it clear that the company is not a sponsor, that you're not going to be able to progress employment for people who do require sponsorship, and ultimately, if people lie on application forms, that to me is an absolute dead list for the future. Honesty when it comes to recruitment practices at the very, very beginning is where we build the foundation of a relationship. So in terms of actual sifting, it's almost impossible to stop somebody lying to you. But certainly there is nothing wrong with saying that we're not a company that is under the sponsorship scheme. We're not going to be able to progress applicants who are relying on that for employment. And ultimately, it's a waste of their time. It's a pointless application for them if they can only work with employers who do have sponsorship status. So for me, it would be to make it nice and clear, nice and early, so that it puts people off applying who aren't going to be eligible to work for you.
The other thing, sorry, I was just going to add actually something I was thinking about as you were talking there.
Yeah.
Something else actually as well. I noticed obviously in the question it was about obviously it's on the day of the interview that the state and the opposite. So if you don't already do so, you could actually do a very short sort of telephone screen prior to inviting people to face-to-face interviews, because we appreciate that when obviously normally most employers are putting sort of at least an hour aside for those face-to-face interviews. So if you could almost have a step before where you're able to just do a short pre-screen over the phone for 5 minutes, and that could include one of the, there could be 3 or 4 sort of key questions that are non-negotiable that you might just want to cover off over the phone. I've seen it happen myself where people have applied and they don't meet that essential criteria, and it's perhaps they haven't got that driving license, and it is a role that absolutely, that's what you said before, but it is a role where it's fundamental, that actually that they need it for the work purposes too. And they thought, well, I'll apply because actually I'm hoping to go and pass my test in 3 months, and then that won't be a problem. But if you need that from day one, so having a pre-screen sort of telephone interview that lasts just 5 minutes actually can save the interview panel an awful lot of time at face-to-face as well. So yeah, I definitely recommend always having a pre-screen call.
Okay, great. And then next question, and this one, I think we've had Becky and Sarah have asked this one. So for the health questionnaires, not to ask prior to them starting, but is it still appropriate to ask for health questionnaires at all? If not, then why? And then another health questionnaire question: aren't these important to have for company first aiders and also to notify of allergies? So just on health questionnaires generally, so a blanket questionnaire application or interview stage, there's actually a section of the Equality Act that prohibits this. So section 60 prohibits us asking about health or disability before you make a job offer. So we can make job offers conditional, or place someone in a sort of pool of successful candidates. But if you're trying to screen for health before you make an offer, that is risky. Once we're making an offer, or if we've got someone, say you've got someone coming for an interview day and you're putting sandwiches out and things like that, of course you can ask about allergies and reasonable adjustments and things like that. So is there anything that we need to be aware of where we need to apply reasonable adjustments or to make you more comfortable on interview day? Do you have any allergies? I do not have an issue with that. But those blanket questionnaires before offer stage are a big no-no. So the safe approach is make conditional offers first, issue your health questionnaires, make sure they're handled confidentially and as a special category of data, remember. So from a GDPR perspective, we've got to be really, really careful with this data. What I would say is ask this information as late as possible. We don't front load this in that recruitment process because it's really, it can be quite dangerous, particularly because if somebody then isn't successful, so you do it pre-offer, and they say, well, look, I believe it's because I've disclosed that I've got various medical needs, and as a result, I'm considered to be too much trouble. That shifts the burden of proof onto you, and you're on the back foot. And at that point, you could be defending a discrimination complaint. So blanket questionnaires before offer, no. What I would say is, if you're asking for first aid reasons and it's legitimately first aid, so Becky, I can see the follow-up question there. If it is legitimately for first aid reasons, so we're asking about things like allergies and access to the premises, so where we may need to assist people, then yes, absolutely. But what I would say is judges are very good at spotting things that are a bit surreptitious. So if we're sneaking in extra questions that we can't justify around people's safety, they're going to get spotted. So it might mean some adjustments to processes there where we make sure that we get those offers out, and then we're looking at, right, well, what if we are asking health questions at that point, then making sure that we do it in the latest stage possible. And Kath, is that something that you come across in terms of from your side of things?
It's very rare actually that I see employers asking nowadays. That things have changed, I think, more recent years, and there's very few employers I see with health questionnaires. So yeah, it's quite a rare one, to be honest with you. Obviously, there are certain settings and certain type of roles where that could be quite important, but absolutely agree with you. Is before offer stage, absolutely no.
Yeah.
From the legal risk side of things.
And look, making an offer conditional. So say, for example, if you have got a role that has certain physical requirements, so say it requires people to undertake heavy lifting, or perhaps it's something, like people working in the care environment where you've got to be able to move people, you make the offer conditional on it, so that then if there is something that is going to prohibit someone from being able to do their role safely and it's linked to something that's medical, then we've made it very, very clear that offer is conditional on them being able to physically do the role. That doesn't get us out of the need to provide reasonable adjustments. If there are reasonable adjustments that can be provided that enable someone to be able to do that role, we can't just rule them out based on a disability. And to give my RNLI example again, so when you join the RNLI as a volunteer, it is conditional upon you being able to pass a fitness test. That is a health test. So I have to do a health screening to make sure that I've had various inoculations and that I can physically undertake the job, because it is a physical role, and that is acceptable, but the offers are conditional on it. So we get the offer, you're deemed to be suitable, and then we go to that stage. So I think we've overrun slightly. It's great that we've had so many questions. It's given Kath and I some good discussion as well. So if there are any other questions, if there's any burning things that you want to answer that you don't necessarily want answered publicly on here, we are happy to take those by email and circulate them in the follow-up that we send with the slides and the recording after the session. And if there's anything that you want to ask Kath specifically, then we can have a chat and get those answers for you and make sure that we get those out to you. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. If there's anything that we can assist you with, whether it is advice, whether it's software, whether it's e-learning, we've also now got everything wrapped up in some nice employers liability insurance as well. So we're entering really, really risky periods over the next few months and even into the years. So if there is anything that we can help you with, don't hesitate to reach out. Please also leave us a trust pilot. We're really trying to be more proactive about that. So it would really, really help us if you are happy to go on there and drop a review for us. Dawn has put the link on the chat. And Dawn has also put the wonderful Kath's website in the chat as well, if you want to go and have a look at what Kath does and the value that she adds to businesses. I know she's very, very in demand, so you'd be very, very lucky to work with her if you get the chance. But thank you so much, Kath, for joining us on this session. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you for being our first guest.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Alyssa, and thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.